in my Portland living room. October 2024, I faced my family. My son Daniel, his wife Vanessa, my grandson Caleb. At 74, I'd given them everything, $100,000. For their condo, $50,000 for Daniel's dreams, $20,000 for Caleb's debts. But their text uninviting me from dinner broke something in me. I asked, my voice steady, "What have you done for me, not for money, but for love?" Silence. Their eyes dropped. Vanessa's lips tightened. Caleb fidgeted. They couldn't answer. I wasn't their mother, their grandmother. I was their bank. Family isn't a word you use to get what you want, I said, heart pounding, but clear. It's a choice. Their silence wasn't just an answer. It was my freedom. That day, I didn't just confront them. I reclaimed myself. Want to know how I went from invisible to unstoppable? Let's start at the beginning. I was standing in my Portland kitchen, smoothing the creases of my navy dress, when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was October 2024, and I was 74, a retired librarian who'd spent a lifetime weaving stories for others, but never imagined my own would unravel in 8 words. I adjusted my glasses, expecting a message from my son Daniel, maybe a reminder about dinner at his Seattle condo that evening. I'd been looking forward to it all week. A simple meal, a seat at their table, a chance to feel like family again. My heart was light picturing his kids, Caleb and Mia, laughing over plates of roast chicken. But when I opened the text, the world tilted. You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there. Daniel's name glared at me from the screen. No call, no explanation. Just those words, sharp as a blade. I read them again, thinking it was a mistake, a glitch, maybe a cruel joke. But it was his number, his tone cold and final. I sank onto a chair, the phone heavy in my hand, my dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a role I no longer played. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support fuels these stories, bringing more tales of courage to light. Thank you. Now let's step back to my story. My mind spun back to Daniel as a boy, his small hand in mine on his first day of school, his tears when our old dog passed his grin when he introduced me to Vanessa. I'd given them everything: money for his failed startup, Vanessa's marketing courses, even $100,000 for their condo. I thought it was love, building a home where we'd all belong. But that text told a different story. It wasn't just a dinner I was uninvited from. It was my place in their lives. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. I just sat there, the silence of my house louder than ever. Something inside me shifted, like a book finally falling open to the right page. For years, I'd been their safety net, my wallet an open book they read without asking. But in that moment, staring at those 8 words, I realized love shouldn't feel like a transaction. I wasn't just hurt, I was awake. And for the first time in decades, I wondered if it was time to stop giving to people who only took. That text didn't just break my heart, it broke a cycle I'd been too blind to see. As I sat in my Portland kitchen, that text from Daniel still burning in my mind, I couldn't help but trace the years that led to this moment. I'm 74 now, a retired librarian who spent decades shelving books and dreams, always putting my family first. My son Daniel, now 45, was the center of my world from the moment he was born. I'd raised him alone after my husband Tom passed, when Daniel was just 10. Every choice I made was for him, to give him a life I never had. When Daniel started his tech startup in Seattle at 30, I didn't hesitate. I wrote a $50,000 check, draining my savings, believing in his big ideas. The business folded in 18 months, but I never mentioned the loss. When Vanessa, his wife, wanted to pivot to a marketing career, I paid for her $15,000 certification course, smiling as she framed her diploma. Caleb, my grandson, needed help with college loans, so I covered $20,000 thinking it would set him free. And when they found their dream condo overlooking Puget Sound in 2023, I handed over $100,000 for the down payment. Not a loan, not an investment, a gift because that's what mothers do. Each time I gave, I saw it as love, a way to keep us tethered. I'd drive up from Portland to Seattle, arms full of casseroles or books for Mia, my granddaughter, imagining evenings where we'd laugh and talk like families do on TV. But those nights were rare. Vanessa's smiles were polite, Daniel's hugs rushed. Still, I kept giving. Car repairs, phone bills, even Vanessa's kitchen remodel with those marble countertops she couldn't live without. My bank account dwindled, but my heart felt full. Or so I told myself. That October evening in 2024, as I prepared for their dinner, I'd been picturing a table where I belonged. I'd bought a new roasting pan just for the occasion, thinking I'd bring my apple pie, the one Daniel loved as a kid. I wasn't asking for a parade, just a seat, a moment to feel seen. But as I stared at that text, "You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there," I realized I'd been writing checks for a place in their lives that never existed. My love had built their world, but it hadn't bought me a home in their hearts. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror in Portland that October evening in 2024, smoothing the navy dress I'd chosen for Daniel's dinner. It wasn't flashy, just a simple, respectable frock, the kind that wouldn't draw Vanessa's subtle eye rolls. At 74, I didn't care for trends, but I wanted to fit in, to feel like I belonged at their Seattle table. The dress was my armor, a quiet hope that tonight might be different, that I'd be more than the woman who paid the bills. As I adjusted the collar, my mind wandered to Daniel as a boy. I could still see him at 6, clutching my hand on our walks through the park, his tiny voice asking why the leaves turned gold. I'd make up stories about autumn fairies, and he'd laugh, his eyes bright with wonder. When Tom died, Daniel became my anchor. At 12, he'd crawl into my bed after nightmares, whispering he'd never leave me. I believed him. Even when he grew up, moved to Seattle, and started a family with Vanessa, I held on to those moments, thinking they'd carry us through. I'd spent weeks planning for this dinner. I'd baked an apple pie, Daniel's favorite, the recipe my mother taught me with cinnamon, dusting the crust just right. I pictured Caleb, now 21, sneaking an extra slice, and Mia, 19, telling me about her college classes. I imagined Vanessa softening, maybe thanking me for the condo down payment, saying, "Evelyn, this home is yours too." It was a dream I'd carried for years. A family that saw me, not just my checkbook. I glanced at the clock, 6:15 p.m. Dinner was at 7 Hours. I grabbed my purse, the pie balanced carefully in its tin, and checked my phone one last time before heading out. That's when I saw it. Daniel's text glowing like a warning light. "You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there." My hands trembled, the pie nearly slipping. I set it down and stared at the screen, the dress suddenly heavy, the hope I'd pressed into its seams unraveling. Those childhood memories, Daniel's hand in mine, his promises, felt like relics, now artifacts of a love I thought was mutual. I wasn't just uninvited from dinner. I was erased from the family I'd built with every sacrifice. Standing there, I realized I'd been dressing up for a role they no longer wanted me to play. I stood frozen in my Portland kitchen, the October light fading through the window, Daniel's text still glowing on my phone. "You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there." At 74, I'd faced loss before. Tom's death, empty nests, quiet birthdays. But this was different. This wasn't grief. It was betrayal. Sharp and deliberate, cutting through the life I'd built for my family. I set the phone down, my apple pie untouched on the counter, its warmth mocking the coldness in my chest. I kept rereading those 8 words, searching for a mistake. Maybe Daniel meant someone else. Maybe his phone was hacked. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was his voice in my head, clipped and careless, echoing Vanessa's dismissal. I sank into a chair, the navy dress crumbling, and let the silence of my house swallow me. For years, I'd been their foundation, $50,000 for Daniel's startup, $15,000 for Vanessa's career, $100,000 for their condo. I thought I was weaving a family together, but now I saw it. I was just the thread they pulled when they needed something. Memories flooded in, not the warm ones this time. I remembered Vanessa's tight smiles when I'd visit Daniel's quick excuses to leave early, Caleb's texts always asking for a quick loan. I'd brushed it off, telling myself families are messy, love is patient. But that text wasn't messy, it was clear. They didn't want me not at their table, not in their lives, unless I came with a check. My heart didn't just break, it unraveled each thread, a sacrifice they'd taken for granted. I stared at the kitchen wall, a photo of Daniel and me at his college graduation catching my eye. He was beaming my arm around him, proud as ever. I'd paid his tuition, worked extra shifts at the library, never once complaining. But now I wondered, did he ever see me, or just the safety net I provided? The question stung, but I didn't push it away. For the first time, I let it sit heavy and true. I wasn't crying, wasn't angry, just awake, seeing my life for what it had become, a ledger of love, unbalanced with me on the losing end. That moment in the quiet of my kitchen, I felt something shift. Not just hurt, but clarity. Maybe it was time to stop being the mother who always said yes and start being the woman who said enough. The October light had faded to dusk in my Portland kitchen. Daniel's text still searing my thoughts. You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there. At 74, I'd carried heavy things, grief, loneliness, hope, but nothing felt heavier than the truth settling in my bones. I stood my navy dress creased from sitting too long and walked to the oak secretary desk in my living room, a relic from my mother. Its drawers held my life's order, every sacrifice neatly filed. I opened the bottom drawer, where I kept the financial records, each folder labeled in my careful handwriting. There, it was the thickest one, Daniel. I pulled it out, the weight of it grounding me, and spread the contents across the table. Receipts, bank statements, canceled checks. A paper trail of love I thought would bind us. There was the $50,000 check for Daniel's startup in 2009, a dream that crumbled in months. Tuition receipts for Vanessa's marketing course, $15,000, her ticket to a new career. Records of $20,000 for Caleb's college loans, car repairs, phone bills, even $8,000 for Vanessa's marble-countered kitchen remodel in 2022. Each document was a story, not of generosity, but of expectation. I ran my fingers over the condo down payment receipt, $100,000, wired in 2023. I'd sold Tom's old stocks, my last safety net, to give them a home. But as I stared at the papers, I saw it clearly. My wallet had been their foundation, my name the invisible ink on their lives. I'd given without question, thinking it was my role as a mother, a grandmother. But now, with that text echoing in my mind, I saw the cost. I wasn't just giving money. I was giving myself away piece by piece until I was invisible. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies truth. I didn't cry or rage. I just sat surrounded by papers, each one a reminder of how I'd let myself become their bank, not their family. My heart ached not for the money, but for the love I'd poured into those numbers, hoping it would earn me a place at their table. That night in the dim glow of my kitchen, I didn't just see the papers. I saw myself, 74 years old, tired of carrying a weight that wasn't mine. For the first time, I asked, what if I stopped? What if I chose me? The question felt foreign, but it was the first step toward something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Sitting at my Portland kitchen table in October 2024, surrounded by financial papers, my eyes locked on the receipt for the $100,000 condo down payment. The memory of that day flooded back vivid as the ink on the page. It was spring 2020. Bree. And Daniel had called me, his voice bright with excitement. He and Vanessa had found the perfect place in Seattle, a sleek condo overlooking Puget Sound, part of a new development with floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mom, it's a home for all of us," he said. "You'll have your own corner, a place to visit to stay." I could hear the kids in the background, Caleb joking, Mia laughing. I believed him. I was 73 then, a retired librarian living frugally in my Portland bungalow. That $100,000 came from selling Tom's old stocks, my last cushion for emergencies. I didn't hesitate. I wired the money picturing family dinners, holidays, maybe a rocking chair by those windows, where I'd read to Mia like I did when she was small. It wasn't just money. It was my heart, a mother's way of saying, "I'm here always." I thought it would tie us together, a foundation for memories we'd share. But as I sat there now, Daniel's text, "You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there," cast a shadow over that memory. That condo wasn't a family home. It was their dream, not mine. I remembered visiting a month after they moved in. Vanessa showed me the new kitchen, her voice clipped as she pointed out the marble countertops I'd helped fund. Daniel was distracted checking his phone. No one mentioned my corner. No one offered a chair. I'd driven home that day, pie tin empty, heart heavy, telling myself it was just a busy season for them. Now, at 74, staring at that receipt, I saw the truth. My gift hadn't bought me a place in their lives. It had bought me out. Every check I'd written, $50,000 for Daniel's startup, $15,000 for Vanessa's career, $20,000 for Caleb's loans, was a brick in a wall I thought was ours. But they'd built it without me, leaving me on the outside, uninvited. The pain wasn't in the money. It was in the hope I'd pinned to it, the belief that giving would make me belong. In that quiet kitchen, the weight of those papers wasn't just financial. It was the weight of a love I'd given unseen, unreturned. For the first time, I wondered if I'd been loving them wrong all along. The Portland dawn broke softly that October morning in 2020. But I hadn't slept. Daniel's text, "You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there," looped in my mind, each word a reminder of the years I'd given without question. At 74, I'd spent decades as my family's anchor, but the papers spread across my kitchen table told a different story. I was their bank, not their heart. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. My hands were steady as I brewed a strong cup of tea, the kind Tom used to make when we faced hard days. I sat staring at the financial records and felt something new, resolve. I picked up the phone and dialed the Portland Community Bank. The line rang twice before a woman's voice answered, calm and professional. I took a breath, my voice clear despite the weight in my chest. "This is Evelyn Harper," I said. "I need to suspend all automatic payments from my accounts, every single one. And I want to revoke the power of attorney granted to my son, Daniel Harper." There was a pause, the faint sound of typing. "That's a significant change, Mrs. Harper," she said. "We'll need your signature to finalize, but I can start the suspension now." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Start today." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was powerful. I'd been funding Daniel's startup failures, Vanessa's career shifts, Caleb's loans. 142 automatic payments, each one a thread tying me to their lives. I thought it was love, but it was dependence, and I'd enabled it too long. Tom's words echoed in my mind. "Evelyn loved them, but don't let them walk on you." I'd forgotten that until now. As the woman confirmed the suspension, I felt the weight lift, not just of the money, but of the role I'd played. Always giving, never asking. I hung up the tea warm in my hands and exhaled. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying their burdens. At 74, I'd spent too long being the mother who fixed everything, the grandmother who paid for dreams that weren't mine. That morning, I didn't just cancel payments. I reclaimed Bama's space in my own life. The kitchen felt quieter, not with absence, but with possibility. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing: I was done being invisible. This wasn't about anger, it was about truth. And for the first time, I was ready to live it. The kettle was whistling in my Portland kitchen that October afternoon in 2024 when the doorbell rang. Sharp, impatient, not the polite chime of a visitor. I was 74, still reeling from Daniel's text uninviting me from his dinner and the bank call I'd made that morning to suspend 142 payments. I opened the door, and there was Daniel, my 45-year-old son, his face a mix of worry and irritation. He didn't wait for an invitation, brushing past me into the living room, his Seattle commute leaving him rumpled but restless. He sank into the armchair, running a hand through his hair. His voice was tight, like he was holding back a storm. He asked why the mortgage payment bounced, why Vanessa's car loan didn't clear, why the bank called about suspended authorizations. I stood by the counter pouring tea, letting his words hang in the air. I could feel his eyes on me, expecting the mother who always fixed things. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I set a cup in front of him untouched and looked him in the eye. My voice was calm, steady. I told him about the text, how he'd uninvited me from the condo. I helped by how Vanessa didn't want me there, and he didn't fight for me. His face flushed, and he stammered that it was a mistake, that Vanessa was upset, that he didn't mean it. I asked softly if he didn't mean to say it or didn't expect consequences. He looked away, the silence louder than his excuses. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told him I'd spent decades paying for his dreams. Vanessa's career, Caleb's loans, $100,000 for their home alone. But it wasn't the money that hurt. It was the invisibility. I asked him to name one thing he'd done for me, not out of obligation, not tied to a check, just because he wanted to. His silence was my answer, heavy and true. I'd been their safety net, but they'd never caught me. Daniel shifted, mumbling about bills, loans, the condo. He said they'd always counted on me, that I'd always been there. Exactly, I thought. They counted on my money, not my presence. That afternoon in my quiet living room, I didn't beg for apologies or promises. I just stood in my truth. I'd given enough. As he left his untouched tea cold on the table, I felt lighter, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally chosen myself. 2 days after Daniel's visit, my Portland doorstep welcomed another guest, my grandson Caleb, 21, his barista apron still tied loosely around his waist. It was October 2024, and at 74, I was still navigating the fallout of that text from Daniel and my decision to cut off 142 automatic payments. Caleb looked disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. He stepped inside, dropping onto my couch, rubbing his hands together like a kid caught in trouble. He didn't waste time. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he explained his credit card was frozen, his rent overdue, his car payment stalled. He owed $6,000, he said, from a new phone, a weekend trip with friends, a few parties he couldn't afford. I sat across from him, my tea cooling, and asked what he'd spent it on, already knowing the answer. He shrugged, avoiding my eyes, mumbling about just needing a little help. I'd heard that tone before. Daniel's, Vanessa's. A reflex, expecting me to open my wallet. I leaned back, my heart steady but heavy. I thought of the $20,000 I'd paid for Caleb's college loans, the car repairs, the emergency cash I'd sent without question. At 74, I'd been their safety net too long. I asked if he'd been working at the coffee shop, if he'd learned to manage his money. He admitted he hadn't, always assuming I'd be there or his parents would. That was the problem, I told him. They all thought I'd fix everything, but I wasn't their bank anymore. His eyes widened, a flicker of panic. He leaned forward, promising to pay me back just this once. I shook my head, my voice firm but kind. I wasn't saying no out of anger, I explained, but out of love, a love that meant boundaries. Instead of money, I offered something else, a job lead. My friend Mr. Whitaker needed a part-time assistant at his law office, filing, answering phones, honest work. Caleb blinked confused as if I'd spoken a foreign language. I told him I loved him, but my love wasn't measured in dollars anymore. He sat there quiet, unsure, a 21-year-old facing consequences for the first time. As he left no cash in hand, I felt a strange relief. I hadn't just said no to Caleb, I'd said yes to myself. In my silent living room, I realized setting boundaries wasn't losing family. It was redefining what family could mean. The October evening light filtered through my Portland curtains a few days after Caleb's visit in 2024, casting soft shadows on my kitchen table. At 74, I was still grappling with the sting of Daniel's text and the weight of cutting off 142 payments, but a gentle knock at the door broke my thoughts. It was Mia, my 19-year-old granddaughter, standing on my porch with a canvas bag of groceries and a shy smile. Unlike the others, she didn't come with a request, just a quiet presence that felt like a balm. I let her in, and we moved to the kitchen without a word, an unspoken rhythm between us. She pulled out carrots, pasta, a block of cheese. Simple things, but chosen with care. As I boiled water, she chopped vegetables, her knife steady, her college stories spilling out between slices. She talked about her literature class, how she quoted one of my old library recommendations in an essay. I smiled, my heart warming at the thought of her carrying a piece of me in her world. We didn't mention Daniel or Vanessa or the bank call. Instead, we cooked the steam rising from the pot like a small promise. Over dinner, just the two of us, Mia asked how I was holding up. Her voice was soft, her eyes searching mine, not for money or favors, but for me. I told her I was okay, and for the first time in weeks, I meant it. She nodded, her smile small but real, and said she'd seen the chaos at her parents' house. Vanessa's anger, Caleb's sulking, Daniel's stress. She didn't defend them, she just listened. As we cleared the plates, Mia said something that stopped me cold. She'd noticed how they leaned on me. She said how Vanessa's new clothes and Daniel's projects always seemed to come from my wallet. At 19, she saw what I'd been too close to recognize. I'd been giving my life away, thinking it was love. Her words weren't judgment, they were clarity, a mirror I hadn't dared look into. She hugged me before leaving, her arms lingering, and promised to come back soon, not for anything but me. That night alone in my quiet house, I felt lighter. Mia's visit wasn't just a meal. It was a reminder of what family could be, safe, sincere, free of expectation. At 74, I'd found a thread of hope in her kindness, a sign that not all love was transactional. For the first time, I believed I could rebuild, not on money, but on moments like these. A week after Mia's visit, in late October 2024, my Portland doorbell rang at exactly 2:00 p.m. I was 74. Still steady from my decision to cut off 142 automatic payments, but bracing for what Daniel had called a family talk. I opened the door to find him, Vanessa, Caleb, and Mia, but my stomach dropped as I saw 3 cars in my driveway. Vanessa's parents, her sister, even a couple of their friends stepping out. I turned to Daniel, his eyes avoiding mine. He mumbled that Vanessa thought more voices would help, as if I needed convincing to open my wallet again. I stood firm at the threshold, my voice calm but unyielding. I told them this was my home, not a courtroom, and only Daniel, Vanessa, Caleb, and Mia could come in. The others could wait outside or leave. Vanessa's smile faltered, her polished confidence cracking as she waved her entourage back to the cars. Inside, my living room felt small with their tension. Vanessa took the lead, her voice loud. rehearsed saying, my financial decision affected everyone. Her parents' retirement, Caleb's future, even her sister's plans. She stood there in designer shoes I'd likely paid for, expecting me to fold. I crossed my arms, letting her words fill the room, but I didn't flinch. When she paused, I asked, my tone steady, when I'd become responsible for all their lives. The silence was thick, their faces blank. Daniel shifted, mumbling about how they'd always relied on me. Caleb stared at the floor, Mia at me, her eyes soft but silent. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it, her argument unraveling. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told them I'd given for decades. $100,000 for their condo, $50,000 for Daniel's startup, $20,000 for Caleb's loans. But what hurt wasn't the money. It was how I disappeared from their hearts the moment I stopped paying. Vanessa's mask slipped, her voice sharp, accusing me of manipulation, of trying to guilt them. I shook my head. This wasn't guilt, I said. It was truth. They hadn't come to mend a relationship. They'd come to save their lifestyle. At 74, I saw it clearly. I'd been their bank, not their family. The room stayed quiet, their silence louder than any defense. I wasn't angry, just done. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting me. As they sat there, expecting the old Evelyn to cave, I realized I wasn't that woman anymore. For the first time, I was choosing my peace over their demands. In my Portland living room that October afternoon in 2024, the air was heavy with unspoken expectations. At 74, I stood facing Daniel, Vanessa, Caleb, and Mia, the weight of their family meeting pressing against me. Vanessa's words about my financial cutoff affecting their lives still echoed, but I wasn't the Evelyn who'd cave anymore. I looked at them, my son, his wife, my grandson, and felt the years of giving flash before me. $100,000 for their condo, $50,000 for Daniel's startup, $20,000 for Caleb's loans. I thought it was love, but their presence here, demanding I resume payments, told a different story. I took a breath, my voice steady, and asked Daniel what he'd done for me, not because he needed something, but because he wanted to. His eyes dropped, searching the floor for answers that weren't there. I turned to Vanessa, asking her to name one thing she'd given me without expecting a check in return. Her lips parted, then closed, her confidence crumbling. Caleb shifted, avoiding my gaze, his silence as loud as the others. Mia watched, her eyes soft, but even she stayed quiet. The room was a mirror, reflecting a truth I'd ignored too long. I'd been their bank, not their family. I didn't shout or cry. I told them calmly that it wasn't the money that broke me. It was the erasure. The way I'd vanished from their hearts the moment I stopped paying. Vanessa's face hardened, accusing me of playing the victim. But I shook my head. This wasn't manipulation. It was clarity. I'd spent decades building their lives, thinking it built our bond, but they'd taken it for granted, uninviting me from a dinner in the home I'd helped buy. I asked them point blank what family meant to them. Was it love or just a ledger? Their silence was deafening, a confirmation that they weren't here for me. They were here for their lifestyle. At 74, I saw it clearly. I'd given enough. I told them I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wanted them to grow, to stand on their own, to see me as more than a wallet. Vanessa stood muttering about regret, but I didn't flinch. Daniel looked at me, eyes glassy, but said nothing. Caleb followed Vanessa out, head low. Mia lingered, her hand brushing mine. But I knew this moment was mine. I'd drawn a line, not out of anger, but out of love, for myself. As the door closed behind them, I felt not loss, but strength. A woman finally standing for her own worth. The silence in my Portland living room that October afternoon in 24 was louder than any words. At 74, I stood before Daniel, Vanessa, Caleb, and Mia, my questions still hanging in the air. What had they ever done for me, not out of need, but out of love? Their faces were a gallery of discomfort. Daniel's eyes fixed on the floor, Vanessa's lips tight, Caleb's hands fidgeting. Mia's gaze held a flicker of understanding, but even she stayed quiet. I'd spent decades giving, $100,000 for their condo, $50,000 for Daniel's startup, $20,000 for Caleb's loans, thinking it wove us together. But their silence told me everything. I'd been a means, not a mother. I didn't fill the quiet with apologies or excuses as I might have years ago. At 74, I'd learned silence could speak, and theirs screamed of a truth I'd dodged too long. They didn't see me. Evelyn, the woman who'd raised Daniel alone, who'd worked extra shifts to fund their dreams, who'd baked pies hoping for a seat at their table. They saw my bank account, the safety net I'd stretched until it tore. Vanessa's accusation of manipulation lingered, but it didn't sting. I wasn't manipulating. I was mourning a family I thought I had. I looked at Daniel, my son now, 45, and remembered his boyhood promises to never leave me. Those promises felt hollow now, replaced by a text that uninvited me from his life. I turned to Caleb, 21, who'd asked for money days ago, expecting me to fix his mistakes. Vanessa, with her polished exterior, had built a life on my sacrifices without a single thank you. Their silence wasn't just an answer, it was a release. I didn't need their words to know I'd been erased long before that text. I told them, my voice soft but unshaken, that family isn't a word we use when we want something. It's a choice we make daily, with actions, not invoices. I wasn't cutting them off to hurt them. I was letting go to save myself. As Vanessa stormed out, muttering Daniel, trailing behind, and Caleb following head low, I felt no anger, only clarity. Mia stayed a moment, her hand squeezing mine, a silent promise she'd stay. The door closed and the silence shifted, not empty, but full of possibility. At 74, I'd finally stopped carrying their weight. That moment wasn't the end of family. It was the beginning of me. By spring 2025, my Portland home felt different, not empty, but open, like a book waiting for new chapters. At 74, I'd spent months untangling myself from the role of family bank, the weight of Daniel's text, and those 142 canceled payments fading into memory. For the first time in decades, I wasn't anyone's emergency contact or silent sponsor. I was just Evelyn, and that was enough. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was a canvas, and I was learning to paint it with my own colors. Mornings became mine. I'd sit on my porch sipping coffee, the Oregon mist curling around the pines, a book open on my lap. I'd rediscovered novels I'd shelved during my library years, stories of women who rebuilt themselves, their courage seeping into me. I started walking through the park where Tom and I used to stroll, the paths, familiar but new, each step a reminder I was moving forward, not back. I even signed up for an art class at the community center, something I'd always wanted but never prioritized. Holding a paintbrush felt awkward at first, my hands stiff from years of writing checks, but each stroke was a small act of creation, a piece of me reclaimed. I thought about Daniel, Vanessa, and Caleb, sometimes their silence after our confrontation lingering. I heard through Mia they'd sold the Seattle condo, moving to a smaller apartment. Vanessa took extra work, Daniel learned to budget, and Caleb, to my surprise, took the job with Mr. Whitaker. I didn't gloat or grieve. I just noted it like a librarian cataloging facts. Their choices weren't mine anymore. I'd spent too long carrying their dreams, thinking it tied us together. But now I saw freedom in letting go. My house, once a vault for financial papers, became a sanctuary. I replaced the heavy folders with sketchbooks, my mother's old desk, now a space for ideas, not obligations. At 74, I was learning joy didn't need to be loud or expensive. It was in the morning light, the smell of fresh paint, the sound of my own laughter. I wasn't running from my family. I was running toward myself. For the first time, I wasn't defined by what I gave others, but by what I gave myself. Time, space, peace. This wasn't the end of my story. It was a new beginning, one where I was the main character, not the footnote. In the spring of 2025, my Portland home became a haven, a place where I was learning to live for myself at 74. But it wasn't just solitude that filled my days. Mia, my 19-year-old granddaughter, became my bridge to what family could be. She'd visit every few weeks, her college backpack slung over one shoulder, her smile bright as the Oregon sun. Unlike the others, she didn't come with outstretched hands or hidden agendas. She came for me, and that made all the difference. We'd sit on my porch sharing tea and stories, her laughter lightening the air. She'd tell me about her literature classes, how she was reading the books I'd once recommended at the library. I'd listen, my heart swelling, seeing pieces of myself in her curiosity. One afternoon, she brought a poetry anthology, reading aloud lines that felt like they were written for us, words about roots and growth, about love that doesn't demand. I told her about my art classes, how I was painting clumsy sunsets, but loving every stroke. She grinned, saying she couldn't wait to hang one in her dorm. Mia never asked about the family drama, Daniel's silence, Vanessa's anger, or Caleb's new job. But she'd share snippets, not with judgment, but with clarity. She said her parents were adjusting to their smaller apartment, learning to live without my safety net. She didn't pity them, just noted it like I did. What mattered was her presence, how she'd show up with a loaf of bread or a playlist of songs she thought I'd like. She called on my birthday, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Her hugs lingered warm and unhurried, a reminder that love could be simple. One evening, as we watched the sunset from my porch, Mia said she was proud of me. At 74, I hadn't expected those words, but they landed softly like rain on parched ground. She saw what I'd done, not just cutting off payments, but choosing myself. She said I'd shown her that family isn't about owing anyone, but about showing up authentically. Her words stayed with me, a gift I hadn't known I needed. Mia wasn't just my granddaughter. She was my mirror, reflecting a truth. I was finally living love doesn't need a price tag. With her, I wasn't invisible. I was Evelyn, and that was enough. Our connection wasn't built on transactions, but on moments, and those moments were rebuilding my heart. By summer 2025, my Portland life had settled into a rhythm of quiet joy. Each day, a step toward myself at 74. But it was Mia who nudged me toward something bigger. She'd found an old photo of me and Tom, my late husband, on a beach, dreaming of a trip we'd never taken. "Do it, Grandma," she said, her eyes bright. "For you." So I did. I called Ruth, my 73-year-old friend from my library days, and we planned a trip to Florence, Oregon, a coastal town with windswept dunes and memories waiting to be made. We arrived on a July morning, the Pacific air crisp, the sky wide and blue. Ruth and I checked into a small inn, its windows open to the sound of waves. I'd spent decades postponing dreams like this, always putting Daniel's needs, Vanessa's plans, or Caleb's debts first. But at 74, standing on the Florence shore, I felt unburdened, the weight of their expectations gone. Ruth laughed as we walked the beach, her scarf fluttering, scribbling notes in her travel journal. "You look lighter," she said, and I was lighter than I'd been in years. I thought of Tom as I stood by the ocean, the sand cool under my feet. We'd planned to see places like this, to chase sunsets together, but life got in the way. Raising Daniel, paying bills, giving too much. Now, I was here not for anyone else, but for me. I painted a watercolor of the dunes in my art class sketchbook, the colors bold and messy, just like I was learning to be. Ruth and I shared clam chowder at a seaside cafe, our laughter louder than the gulls, and I realized joy didn't need to be grand. It was in these moments chosen for myself. Mia texted me a photo of her new apartment that evening with a note. "Can't wait for you to visit Grandma. Your room's ready." I smiled, knowing our connection was real, not tied to money or duty. Daniel and Vanessa hadn't called in months, and I didn't chase them. I'd heard they were managing rebuilding without me as their crutch. Caleb was working at Mr. Whitaker's office, finding his way. I didn't need their apologies. I needed this. Sand Sea and the freedom to be Evelyn. At 74, this trip wasn't just a getaway. It was a promise I'd kept to myself, a dream I hadn't let slip away again. It was a warm July evening in 2025, and I was sitting on the balcony of our Florence, Oregon inn, the Pacific sunset, painting the sky in gold and violet. At 74, I'd found a rhythm of peace. Art classes, walks, Mia's visits. But that moment, as the waves whispered below my phone, buzzed, Daniel's name lit up the screen. 6 months ago, I'd have answered before the second ring, heart racing, ready to fix whatever was wrong. But now I just watched the screen, my fingers still, my breath steady. I thought of the old Evelyn, the one who'd paid $100,000 for his condo, $50,000 for his startup, $20,000 for Caleb's loans, always hoping it would earn me a place in their lives. I remembered his text, "You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there," and the silence in my living room when I asked what they'd done for me, that Evelyn would have picked up, eager for reconciliation, ready to forgive without question. But I wasn't her anymore. Ruth, my friend, sat nearby, scribbling in her travel journal, her presence a quiet anchor. I didn't need to hear Daniel's voice to know what he'd say. An apology laced with need, a promise to do better, a subtle plea for help. I'd heard it before in every call, after a bounced payment or a late bill. But at 74, I'd learned freedom wasn't letting go of people. It was letting go of their permission to define me. I didn't owe him an answer, just as I didn't owe him my savings or my time. The phone went dark, the call unanswered, and I felt no guilt, only calm. I picked up my wine glass, raised it to the horizon, and whispered to myself, to the woman who'd spent decades coming last. The Evelyn who smiled through lonely birthdays, who paid for a condo she was uninvited from, who thought love meant saying yes, she was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who chose peace over promises, who found joy in sunsets and sketchbooks, not in fixing others' lives. Mia's text came later, a photo of her apartment with a note. "Your room's waiting, Grandma." That was enough. I didn't need Daniel's call to feel whole. I'd built a life that wasn't measured by what I gave others, but by what I gave myself. As the Florence sky deepened, I knew this was freedom, not absence, but presence, the quiet strength of a woman who no longer needed to be needed. As the July 2025 sunset faded over Florence, Oregon, I sat on the inn's balcony, the Pacific's rhythm steady below. At 74, I was no longer the Evelyn who answered every call, paid every bill, or lived for others' approval. Daniel's unanswered call from the night before lingered in my mind, but it didn't pull me back. I'd spent decades giving $100,000 for his condo, $50,000 for his startup, $20,000 for Caleb's loans, thinking it was love. But love isn't a transaction, and I'd learned that the hard way through a text that uninvited me from a family I'd built. Looking back, I saw the journey clearly. That October day in 2024, when Daniel's words, "You're not invited. Vanessa doesn't want you there," shattered my illusions. I could have stayed the mother who fixed everything. Instead, I chose myself, canceling 142 payments, facing Daniel's confrontation, setting boundaries with Caleb, and finding solace in Mia's genuine care taught me that family isn't owed. It's chosen every day through actions, not expectations. My trip to Florence with Ruth, painting dunes, and laughing over chowder wasn't just a getaway. It was a promise to live for me. At 74, I found peace not in the absence of noise, but in the presence of self. My Portland mornings filled with coffee books and art classes were mine. Mia's visits her room, waiting in her apartment, showed me love could be simple, free of price tags. Daniel, Vanessa, and Caleb were finding their way without me as their crutch, and I didn't need their apologies to feel whole. I'd let go of the need to be needed, and in that release, I found strength. If my story speaks to you, it's because you know what it's like to give until you're invisible to love, until it hurts. I'm here to tell you it's never too late to draw a line, to choose yourself, to say no. Not out of anger, but out of love for the life you deserve. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors to your own peace. Share this story if it moved you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't in what you give others, but in what you claim for yourself. At 74, I learned I don't owe anyone my savings, my time, or my silence. What I owe is honesty, to myself, to my heart. Take your power back. You're worth it.